Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special Substack Live. I'm here with the amazing Ellie Leonard, who joins us from her Substack. And it's nice to be with you, Ellie, because we're talking all things Epstein, which is one
Yes,
of
we
my favorite
are.
topics.
I know,
You've,
right?
you, Good.
I was gonna say I didn't know it was one of my favorite topics till a couple months ago, and now here we are. So there you go.
So a lot of people's favorite topics, although not Donald Trump's.
No.
It's interesting. I was just watching live coverage of his state visit to Windsor and his dinner with King Charles and Queen Camilla. And just hours before they started, they had a projection on the Windsor walls of this whole 9-minute documentary, really about Epstein and Trump's history, which is it's interesting. A lot of people don't realize how deep a history it is, and I've certainly been covering it for many years. But it was nice to see on the walls, and at least the protesters. I mean, they got arrested, unfortunately, but they
Well, I think if we're gonna protest, this is something I was telling my husband.
yeah
We've got to start getting creative, and that was a very creative means of protest. I commend the people that did that.
yeah absolutely. You guys can hear someone saying they don't have audio. Yeah, it looks like you do. Do you have audio, or do you not have audio?
Can you hear me?
Hello, everybody. I can hear you, but can everyone else hear us? If you're on the chat, just tell us if you can hear us or not. Maybe there's a bit of a lag.
Yeah.
So they can't hear. I can't hear. Good. Okay, terrific. So, Ellie, you've got this amazing history that you started off your Substack. You were a transcriber. And tell us how that led you to this world of becoming an author, which I know has always been a lifelong dream, but
Yeah,
uh,
I grew up around writers. My mom was a writer, my sibling is a writer. I grew up in kind of the world of poets. We knew a man named Raymond Carver, who was a very well-known poet. We grew up with his family. And so I think it's on some level, it's in my blood. It just had to happen. I think it happened for me after my kids were out of diapers and I could sort of recognize my creative self and have a little bit of time for it. And so I had been hustling a couple of books for a couple of years and dealing with the sad journey of publishing
mm,
and somebody led me to Substack and said, why don't you just try Substack and just go right there. You'll have people reading your writing, and in the meantime, while you try to publish, it's just a great place to be. And so I started off doing that, and kind of dabbling in politics and current events and a little bit of fiction. And then I just wrote one piece because I was curious. I just made a list of the connections between Trump and Epstein and just put them all chronologically together. And I was like, you know what? That was interesting. I'll just publish that. And it went wild. I had no idea people were so interested in that kind of thing. And so that sort of kicked off the Epstein saga for me. But prior to coming to Substack, I work a small business. I run a small business where I transcribe for journalists and filmmakers and podcasters and things like that. And so I've worked in kind of this world for a long time. I've worked with the royals. I've worked with the Obamas. I've worked with like the Woody Allen case, things like that, to where you get to hear all this off the record stuff and you read all these um, kind of juicy bits of information that people don't get to hear, and learning how to navigate what's true and what's false and what's evidence and what's not, and how to write in a way that's not just sensationalized writing, but it's actual kind of, you have a little integrity to your writing, and you're trying to investigate something for a purpose and be part of like a bigger picture of something. And so that led me to Substack in the beginning, and now I don't know where it's going. Now it's just going. So
well, that's good. I mean,
well,
I love your Substack, and I love
thank
Substack
you.
in general. I just think it's such a phenomenal place because up until now, it's really been impossible for writers or creators of any kind to be able to earn anything resembling a decent amount of money for the work that has been done. And because of all the great people on Substack who support all of our work and who really help, this independent creator world flourish, it's amazing to me how it is flourishing. Like there is so many great people like you on it, Nick's on it,
Thank you. You
just
too.
everybody. There's voices I haven't heard of, but also voices I have heard, but they're now crafting more, deliberate pieces and more interesting videos. And it's turning out to be a place that is very unique. There's really no place like
Mhm.
Substack. It's almost like a Netflix was so brand new when it came along, and it was like its own version of television.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think Substack is that. So I really thank everybody who subscribes to our work, and everyone should absolutely subscribe to Ellie's work because it's
Thank you.
phenomenally
Back
interesting.
at you.
And it's thank you, and it's absolutely crosses paths with what I've been doing on The Greatest Heist, which is really a look at how Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were involved in this network, which was, involved in the biggest crime in history. And you've done a terrific thing because you've gone through the Epstein birthday book and transcribed it because you're a transcriber. And we did this a few weeks ago with Dean. We went through the book. It's really hard to read some of the scrolls and some of the things that are written down there. And on your Substack right now, there are 5 parts of the Epstein birthday book transcribed. We won't go through them all because some of the books people have seen already. But it is interesting. This is coming out right now at the same time that the Oversight Committee, it looks like, has released new information today. I haven't looked at the new stuff that they've put out yet, but there is a lot of new data that's come out, including financial records. But they've also hinted that they think, the 218 votes. Democrats have the 218 votes to get this discharge petition, Democrats and Republicans, to get this discharge petition passed, which will allow a vote on the release of the Epstein files. So there's a lot going on in the Epstein world. And of course, Donald Trump is not a fan of any of that. What I found really interesting, because I was just writing about this in the latest chapter of Greatest Heist, is what we found out about, and I know this is very niche, but I'm fascinated by it. And I apologize if it gets too geeky for people, but I loved finding out that Jeffrey Epstein knew Robert Maxwell from the 1970s. Originally the story was that Ghislaine Maxwell had met Jeffrey Epstein in 1991. She said it as recently as her recent interview with Todd Blanche. She said they met in the early 90s. When in reality, I'd heard that they had been together since the 80s, since like the Iran-Contra scandal in the UK when Epstein was stationed there. But it goes back even further than that. According to the book, the birthday book reveals to us that they actually met in the early 70s. Tell us where that is and how that comes out from the book.
Okay, so I can tell you exactly where it is. It's on page 234. And it was a very, every once in a while when I'm going through, like listening to the Maxwell interviews or transcribing the birthday book, or sometimes something will just pop out and I go, oh, that links up to back to there. And this was one of those things because she has sworn up and down that that's a big mistake to say that Epstein has ever met her father. She said that they never met. Like
really?
She had talked. Yeah, she says that they talked on the phone.
There's a photograph of them together on the
I don't
yacht
even know.
that was named after her from 1989. There's a photo, but okay, that's.
She says that the only contact they had was her calling her daddy on the phone and being all giggly about a boy that she liked in 1991 when she's in her 30s, right?
Yeah.
And she swore there was no financial records between the two of them. There was no connection between the two of them. Swore up and down in these interviews, which she can be perjured for. She's not immune from perjury from these interviews.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yes. So she can't. Right at the beginning, they say something like, you have immunity, but you do not have immunity from lying. So if you perjure yourself, you can be, convicted of that. Not like they would ever bring a charge against her, but it's there. Well, come to find out, when I've transcribed, all this salacious, very sexualized birthday book, nobody is hiding anything in this book.
Yeah.
You get to a letter almost at the end because it's separated into friends, girlfriends, assistants, family members, business associates. That's kind of how they separate the book. You get to the business associates and you get to this guy named Elliot Wolk, who's, a financier, which is 90% of the people he knows. And he says, oh, it's so great. Remember when I was working with Bob Maxwell back in 1970 and something about the teenage Ghislaine Maxwell, and remember, did you get her back?
Yeah, let me read it. So I've got it here. So
go for it.
It says, Jeffrey, I remember in the mid-1970s, you being a star salesman for our tax advantaged strategies and hedged option program. This is all at Bear Stearns, when he was still at Bear Stearns, and Woke was at Bear Stearns for a long time. I was running an account for Bob Maxwell. And then it says, you always had the ability to know everyone and be charming. Was that when you first discovered the Maxwell teenage daughter? Happy birthday, Elliot Wolk. So that's not only saying, hey, he met Bob Maxwell or Robert Maxwell in the 1970s, mid-1970s, but that he also met Ghislaine as a teenager, which fits into the profile of his. And by the way, Robert Maxwell also had a liking for, what was the term that Trump used, very young girls or something like that.
Yeah.
So they shared that interest, which is gross and disgusting and all of that.
Yeah.
But also interesting that he met her as a teenager. Um,
Yes.
so,
Probably why they didn't want to release the book, you know?
yes, the other piece of why they didn't want to tell us in the 1990s until later on about the 1990s um, is because they were trying to build a cover story. I mean, as far as I see the story, Jeffrey Epstein is Robert Maxwell's heir apparent in his espionage business. And he was basically training under Robert Maxwell and doing work for Robert Maxwell all the way through the 70s and 80s with all sorts of things. And that the business, as it were, was going to be handed off to Ghislaine Maxwell. And then she would meet Jeffrey Epstein in the US, and they'd be partners together, and be able to be this new construct of this new sort of super spy couple. And that's in fact what we were told up until really, really recently. Until recently, we had no idea that this had gone back to the 70s. So I was fascinated by that.
Well, and Ghislaine Maxwell in her interviews doesn't deny that her father was very involved with espionage and intelligence. Like she says that she doesn't really know, I don't really know if he was or not, but he was in British intelligence, and when you know, you know. And it's a lot of that where she doesn't say yes or no, and that's a pretty definitive no if the answer is no, right? And then you have someone like Steve Bannon, who out of the blue becomes best friends with Jeffrey Epstein in 2015 because he also thought that Epstein worked for the CIA and intelligence, and he wanted to work for the CIA and intelligence. And so that was kind of the basis of their
That's
relationship.
interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, he was kind of fangirling over Epstein because he
Hmm.
thought he worked for the CIA and that's what he wanted. He had always wanted to go back to the White House and work for the CIA after he got booted. And so there was this pretty well-known idea coming from the White House and people who had worked in the White House that Epstein did work in intelligence, but nothing on paper, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me that people outside of that spy world don't, and I didn't know anything about this until someone told me about it.
Mhm.
That there are these constructed people. They're constructs, is what they call them. They're not real. They are real people. Obviously, they are Elon Musk, but they are Elon Musk surrounded by so much intelligence support and national support and networks that really amplify who they are and amplify their wealth and amplify their things. So they're like heightened versions of themselves. And Elon Musk is considered one of those people. Jeffrey Epstein is considered one of those people, and Robert Maxwell was definitely considered one of those people. He's sort of one of the first super spies. He was the publisher of the Mirror
Right.
Group, had incredible access to all sorts of people because of that, but was also the owner of the Pergamon Press, which published scientific novels, scientific
Mhm.
books, which, by the way, was a spy front for the KGB. And it's certainly in the United States, everyone knew that he was affiliated with the KGB and then later with Israel. Um, and the same affiliation, I believe, we'll find out at the end of the day, is the same affiliation that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have. I mean, they certainly are connected to Israeli military intelligence, but they're also connected to the Russians. And that kind of symmetry you see over and over and over again when you're investigating the Trump-Russia story, because it's like, it's always Israel and
Yeah.
Russia and the mob, and it's that thing that happens over and over again. Even with the story last week with Charlie Kirk, that story is still about that same group of people in my mind. It's the same organization. So
Well, it's the people with power. The people with power are always going to have their toe in every whatever the metaphor is, right?
yeah,
Um, it is kind of like the mob. And at first I thought, well, was Epstein involved with the mob, as we think of it, because he worked in construction. That was one of his things, is he worked in finance and construction, and those two worlds probably a little mobbish. But it is more like he had his own mob, right? It was his own system, his own like system of government within this sort of billionaire boys club. And to me, what I've always said is that's the bigger reason why they don't want to release the files, because money spreads a lot farther than sexual crimes, right? Sexual crimes are big, but money covers so many industries, covers politics, covers entire cities and sections of the country and global. And that will take down so much more. And like and the infrastructure of everything more than an actual sex ring does. And I think that's their main reason
Yeah.
for not.
I mean, sure, it's a financial crime network, and people think of the mob in sort of that old school way of running, like racketeering or selling drugs or whatever. There's the mob these days is highly sophisticated and runs like massive pump and dump schemes on stock prices, can manipulate entire industries through data. They do a lot of the hacking, all the stuff that North Koreans do in terms of hacking and what do they call that thing where they keep your data hostage,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. It's those, that is a mob operation at a large extent, and it's much cleaner and it makes lots more money than if you have to build condos like Donald Trump did, or if you have to actually
Hmm.
run, other kinds of operations. And Epstein was very good at that money side of it.
Right.
So was
Well,
Robert Maxwell.
that sounds a lot like what the government is doing now, like with the data and with like Bitcoin and all these different things. And I think about what would things have looked like in this administration if Epstein was still alive, right? What things would have been worse or different because he would clearly have had a hand in what was going on, and maybe he still does on some level, but I think the repercussions from Epstein are now in the White House and are now
Yeah,
running
he
Bitcoin,
claimed
running
he,
all these.
he claimed to Michael Wolff that Trump had asked him for a job at the first take on a ministerial role in the first administration. So he claimed that he might have even been approached. Who knows? I love this other thing that happens in the same chapter because there's a lot more from Bear Stearns, and Bear Stearns is this company where we're just like, what is that? Just a financial firm that's been around forever. But Bear Stearns was interesting as a nexus point because is the stuff from Ace Greenberg here? I think it is.
Yeah. So Ace Greenberg was the guy who was a father of a student at Dalton.
Yeah,
And when Epstein kind of lost, he did. I don't get that he was super fired from Dalton, but he eventually lost his job at Dalton. And Ace Greenberg had somehow become good friends with him. Says, "Why don't you come over to Bear Stearns and I'll make you this great financier?" Which is just a weird, it's a weird connection. Your son's teacher. You're like, let's come be a financier.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was very unusual. And why would a math teacher make a good financier? And then he was fired from Bear Stearns a few years later for doing some crazy stuff with the Bronfman family, but and stealing money there for them. But he never really was outed from the Bear Stearns family, as I found out much later. He would be running all these other operations for Bear Stearns for a long period of time, even though he had not even licensed to do that. But there's
Hmm.
another indication of that right here in this book, where this is 2003, right?
Hmm.
And Jeffrey is getting a birthday book from Ace Greenberg, the guy who hired him way back in the 80s to work at Bear Stearns. So they obviously were still friends. In fact, we know now that they were not only friends, they were still working together. So it says
Hmm.
here, when Jeffrey joined Bear Stearns 24 years ago, it was our plan to put him on the American Stock Exchange floor to trade options on common stocks. Up until then, options had been traded over the counter. Jeff said no, and that was the last difference we ever had. Working with Jeffrey had been a pleasure, and watching his meteoric success has given me many vicarious thrills. I am sure that we will see Jeffrey's star glow even brighter. Good luck, Jeffrey. Ace Greenberg. So
Hmm.
that's to me, Ace is such an interesting character, he's larger than life, sort of Wall Street character who, um, also, interestingly enough, was Donald Trump's key stockbroker
Hmm.
throughout most of Donald Trump's life. When Donald Trump was financing his casinos in the 1990s and no one else would loan him money, or maybe it was the 80s, it was Ace Greenberg who got him money through a really heavily leveraged junk bonds. But that's how he funded the build of the Taj Mahal and all those Atlantic City things. So he's another nexus point where you've got Jeffrey Epstein, you've got Donald Trump, and now you've got Robert Maxwell, all on around the same company. I mean, that's really interesting to me. That to me is like,
Yeah, it's a very small club, if
yeah,
you know what
yeah,
I mean. Yeah.
yeah. It's fascinating. Go ahead if you. I don't know. I'm just
Well,
riffing
I
here. So if
just
you can,
you'll start to see names pop up that you're like, wait, I remember that name from back over. It's just like this big web where people just keep showing up in different places, like Ace Greenberg. Like, why is Ace Greenberg in his birthday book when he's the father of a student at Dalton, and why again, why was Epstein hired as this financier on Wall Street from a job that he wasn't even qualified teaching math at or at a private school? Um, and then when you look through his black book, because like right now I'm going through the entire black book, which is going to take me forever, but I'm going through and I'm vetting each person in there and defining who exactly they are. 90% people in finance. Like he knew hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who worked in finance.
And people who are nuclear scientists, lots of them, and people who are world leaders. I mean, or influenced world leaders. I mean, those are sort of his friends network, which is the kind of friend network. If you're a spy for Israel or the
You're right.
KGB, that would be a good spy network.
Yeah, his black book
That
is very, yeah, it's big.
yeah. Um, that's that's sort of the non-salacious stuff that I find the most interesting in terms of the book. But there is a lot of stuff in the book which is just hard to believe people would put the stuff down on a piece of paper and give it to anybody. Maybe times have changed a lot since 2003, but it just strikes me as being stunning that they had these kinds of revelations. And yet there they were. So do you want to take us through some of them? I think you said there was in,
Yeah, I
um,
think the things that struck me, well,
yeah.
overall, big picture, um, prior to him ever being arrested for any sex crimes, people didn't have it on the radar that they needed to be careful in how they spoke about him. I think if this book had come out a few years later, they probably wouldn't have written these letters the
Oh, yeah.
same way.
Yeah.
But when they had no filter because they didn't think they needed one, this entire book is written about how to rape women and children and
And
what
groom.
grooming people and like fictionalizing like there's one point on page 62, I think, where they talk about taking the rabbi's daughter and grabbing her breasts under her shirt and then sending her back to play with her toys,
Yeah,
right?
that's
This
right.
is supposed to be like fictional stories, but I don't think you or I have ever written fictional stories about that kind of thing. And the average person probably hasn't written fictional stories about that kind of thing. But just that this was on all these people's minds enough to write this in Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book means that this is something that he had a reputation for prior to being arrested for anything. And it's just like it's like the idea where there's smoke, there's fire. There's a lot of smoke in this birthday book talking about everything that he liked. And from a very early age, he talks about him going to Europe as a teenager with his friend and then bringing a girl back to the US with him, which is like very foreshadowing.
Little human
You know,
trafficking.
yeah, and he's like bringing and from Eastern Europe, always from Eastern Europe.
Hmm.
So it's just so brazen and unfiltered and because they didn't know that this was going to be any kind of a record. But the thing you have to remember is this was not even in the FBI files. This was in Epstein's estate. This book was not part of the raid. The FBI didn't have this book,
Good
um,
point.
which which means they don't have a lot of really, really interesting things. But also because we now have the book, it means that the owners of the estate, which are Darren Indike and Richard Kahn, who is his lawyer and accountant, they are willing to be bought. They are willing to have deals made, which means we could end up with more of this type of stuff, even if we're not getting it from the FBI. So,
Yeah, I mean, I always question, those two guys because they were so involved in managing the whole thing along the way. I mean, they're not new to the estate. They were part of Epstein's world all the way through. So, but they must know everything. They must know where every literal dead body is buried and then some.
yeah,
So it would be interesting to get them on the record. Maybe we'll get to hear from them one day.
that'd be good.
It'd be amazing to do that. This book is also, of course, important because it's got Donald Trump in it, and there's that famous silhouette picture that he's drawn of this woman and his birthday message to Donald Trump. But there's another. And I can't see it here. So I don't know what page it is, but this Jeffrey and someone else is holding up a check that's signed by Donald Trump, and it's taken at Mar-a-Lago, and they talk about basically selling each other. It was a person. I mean, it sounds like they're
Yeah,
selling. I
yeah,
mean, maybe it's something else, but it sounds like they've sold a young woman to each other for
yeah.
$22,000, and I was like,
I mean,
so
even if it's a joke, that's the
yeah,
things that they're joking about,
yeah,
right? It's this conversation that the rest of us probably aren't having. We're not joking about selling a fully depreciated woman for $22,500.
Yeah.
Like that's just not that's an odd conversation to have. But
Yeah.
they're bragging about it and taking a picture about it and captioning the picture. So, and you have to remember too, not only was this birthday book made, Jeffrey Epstein commissioned the birthday book. He went out and told people to send him things, and he told people what to put in his birthday book. So he's aware of all this stuff being compiled because he's helping make his own birthday book.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not
Amazing.
being done
And
for
so is
him.
Ghislaine. I mean, who's landed up going to jail for this thing.
Yeah.
And she's like providing the evidence, the fuel to the
Right.
fire by putting this book together. It's kind
Well,
of stunning.
it completely contradicts everything she says in her interviews, like
Right.
how well she didn't know him. You know, she spent the whole 2 days saying that she didn't know him that well.
Yeah.
Yet they're swimming around with her topless in the pool. She knew him.
Yeah. They obviously knew each other, but there's also this thing that, Donald Trump in that Air Force One interview a few weeks ago, years, maybe it was months ago now, brags about how he got Jeffrey Epstein because he was upset about Jeffrey Epstein selling what was then, Virginia Giuffre as a young pool attendant and masseuse to Jeffrey, and admitting that they viewed this young woman as property that was stolen from him. I mean, that was such a loaded term, and it really upset the Giuffre family for obvious reasons. But it seems to line up with this idea that they were buying and selling young teenage girls. I mean, there's no other way
Right.
to look at that.
Well, two things with that. Number one, Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't deny that she would pull people from the spa at Mar-a-Lago. She just says, I don't remember if I did that or not, which I found really interesting because that would be something I would think she would just outright deny because she's denied a lot of things that she actually did. But the second thing is Trump really screwed himself by saying that because he didn't need to say anything.
No, he didn't.
And him admitting he even knew who Virginia was, he had 150 employees. Would you know the teenage locker room attendant in the girls' locker room? Probably not. You wouldn't know her by name, certainly. And so him admitting he knew exactly who she was hurts him. I mean, that was a stupid move because their breakup wasn't based on that. Their breakup was based on property, right? They were trying to outbid each other on the same stupid mansion and saying that the other didn't have money, and then he turned around and flipped it to a Russian oligarch.
Well, that's
right?
a whole other story, actually. That's a more interesting story than has ever been put to light yet. But you're right about it. Someone in the chat was just saying that people talk about stealing employees all the time. But we know what happens with Virginia Giuffre. We know she's landed up becoming trafficked to all sorts of people, passed around like a platter, as Waj likes to say, and then landed up in this compromising thing with Prince Andrew on behalf of Epstein and Ghislaine. So it's not like it's just everyday stealing. It's everyday stealing of someone who lands up becoming trafficked to a bunch of women and is now sadly dead because this has been a very difficult. We don't actually know. She's committed suicide for sure. Is the official reason, but we don't know the circumstances in the last few weeks or months that caused her to do that or to die. Tell me what else you think we should know about this book? Because
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, just throw anything in. I'm just asking you to.
Well, one thing I just didn't want to forget is, and you just kind of jogged my memory, is there's a point in there somewhere, and I don't know the page, where they talk about going to the Tramp Club in London. And his buddies are talking about, remember, we used to go to the Tramp Club all the time. Yeah. The Tramp Club is where Virginia Giuffre says she met Prince Andrew.
That's right.
And Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew have sworn up and down that they've never been there. Prince Andrew said he was at like a pizza party with his kids. Well, so here's a letter in there that's talking about how they used to go to the Tramp Club all the time. And that kind of, for me, that validated what Virginia was saying. I already believed her, but I was like, well, here it is with somebody who didn't even know there would be a trial.
Yeah, she did an interview with Savannah Guthrie of NBC News a few years ago. That's where she tells that story about going to the Tramp Club and that they went with her. So I can't imagine they didn't go with her to meet Prince Andrew and to get that together. It is interesting to bring this back to Prince Andrew as the king is now, cheersing and toasting Donald Trump and his wife in Windsor Castle, and only the second time this has been a state dinner that he has attended twice. They obviously have a fondness for him, but there's also other people say this is just a way of greasing the wheels so that they can get more into his brain, into his side, because they don't want it to be so aligned with Russia. But who knows what the real diplomatic undertones of all of this are. But it's remarkable that, Prince Andrew plays such a big role in the story of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And the affiliation between Trump and Epstein is significant, obviously. I mean, that's what we're waiting to find out from these files. And yet there he is, the man who was part of the network, let's say that, who brought down the president's brother, like the king's brother, who really has damaged the king's brother's life in a really dramatic way.
Yeah.
And it's just so wild to see them. They should be hating each other, but they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They're toasting each other.
It's that, what is the phrase they use for the royal family? Never complain, never explain. Is that what it is? It's that
I hadn't heard that, but it could be.
It's just everything is fine all the time, and we won't show anything on the outside. Everything's fine. Let's have tea.
Yeah, no, I think it certainly looked like that. It looked like a spectacular dinner. I'm sure they all had a great time. I could not believe the size of these halls, and I was going to play some video, but we'll do that another time. But there's just the opulence and the amount of money, and I'm not sure what Donald Trump is playing here with the king. There are rumors the king is going to offer a return to the empire to Donald Trump, that he will be offer a return to the the loose commonwealth that is the empire. That's a possibility. I think the president might even like to take something like that. And then if you think about that in the context of where America has gone on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and if you think that could be what they're discussing on this day, is quite something that, 250 years later, after having gotten rid of the king, having got rid of the monarchy, they would now be discussing a return to an affiliation with the king.
We live in strange times.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Jeffrey Epstein and, the other thing I always find fascinating is Ghislaine Maxwell was a childhood friend of Andrew, and grew up in the near Buckingham Palace, and the Maxwells had a place just down the street from the Buckingham Palace, and they were good friends. Maxwell was good friends with the Queen.
And she does not like Fergie. When you listen to her interview, she did not like Fergie. I think she blames Fergie for the whole Andrew breakup, but she also doesn't like Fergie because Fergie liked Epstein. She had a crush on Epstein. So you can hear just jealousy seething from her voice when she talks about Fergie. Yeah.
Because you've also transcribed all the Maxwell audio tapes, which
almost all of them, not quite.
Just what an endeavor! And anything what struck you from that? What struck you in those?
Lots of jealousy. She had lots of jealousy about other women like Eva Anderson, different people in Jeffrey Epstein's life, and I think much of her position with Jeffrey Epstein was because she was obsessively in love with him. Mm-hmm. I don't think he thought a lot about her, but I think he got from her what he wanted. Again, a major thing that I noticed is she says the name of a Jane Doe, and they didn't redact it. That was shocking to me when they redact Virginia Giuffre throughout, and it's very obvious who they're talking about. Yet they openly say the name of Jane Doe, and they never redact it. And I've talked with multiple lawyers about what the repercussions are for that, and everybody seems to think that the onus is on the Jane Doe to respond. Whereas I feel like there should be legal repercussions.
Yeah, they should. I'm just interested. There's someone commenting about the way we've discussed. I'm not sure what they're saying here. They're saying, we're not. I'm not suggesting. I can't read this entirely thing. What is it? Because it's really small on my phone.
Well, these conversations are triggering, but that's what we're discussing. Is
Yeah, I mean, we should have maybe had a warning that this is the conversation we're going to be having, and I apologize for not doing that at the top of the show. I mean, it's very hard to have these kinds of conversations and not trigger, and yet we still have to have these conversations, and there's still an enormous amount of interest in this story, and it's not only because it's affects so many women who are victims of this human trafficking, who are survived this human trafficking, frankly, which was horrific, and but this has a real implication on where America goes. The reason the Trump administration is trying so hard to bury the story, why they're calling it such a hostile act against the administration is because those files may contain some really, really bad things about the president that people need to know about, and that could change a different. That could chart a different course for America. So as much as we're not ignoring the victims and the survivors, and I know some of them, and they're very. In each case, you can tell will have never been the same since, and have had their lives completely shattered, and wouldn't the endless amount of harm they've been put under repeatedly, and the re-triggering of their experience, the re-traumatizing of their experience every single time the Epstein story comes up is unfathomable, really. So I apologize for not framing that in that way. My interest is really about the money and the politics between these people, and I'm not negating everything that, or even at all. I know that stuff is very, very well covered elsewhere, but the money is not, and the politics not.
In my writing, when I do talk about some of this stuff, I do put triggers at the top, just because there are really harsh details, for sure.
Yeah, and this is not for the faint of heart. I mean, reading this book is some of it. I was shocked. I was shocked to see that there was these kinds of confessions and these kinds of, just recounting their experiences that they just took so naturally. They just like, oh, well, this is just the way things are. And meanwhile, they're in the midst of a human trafficking operation. Ellie, it's been so nice to do this with you. It's great to catch up. Congratulations on your Substack, and congratulations on doing all this incredible work around
Thank you. You
the
too.
birthday book. Thank you. But it's very helpful to me. And as I said, this Bear Stearns stuff is going to be the next greatest heist, which my AI weirdly deleted today, which is so weird. I know. I was like, this is really creepy. So I have to reconstruct it a little bit, but nevertheless, it's in there. The Bear Stearns connection, and I'm fascinated that you've been able to highlight for me, because I didn't realize this was in the book until I asked you, because you had transcribed it. All the stuff was in bad handwriting, and you couldn't really pay attention. And
yeah, right.
And knowing that Maxwell, a little detail like knowing that Maxwell knew Epstein in the 70s changes a whole narrative.
Doesn't it?
It's really useful. So thank you so much for doing all this work. You're terrific. And I hope everyone follows you and supports you, because you deserve every bit of it. And
I gotcha.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess we've got to go now.
I got to go take my kids to back to school night.
Well, great. Enjoy that. And hopefully we'll do this again soon. It's been great chatting to you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.
Thanks, everybody.